I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm Katherine Wu, Director of Disability Services here at Berkeley College. I'm so glad you could join us in the first of our series of talks in celebration of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, a celebration of Asians and Pacific Islanders who live in the United States. I encourage you all to post any comments and questions you may have in the chat. While I may not address them right away as we speak, please know that I will definitely try to address them by the end of our presentation. So first, I want to show you a map, let me see, of Asia, which of course is not here. Here we go. Let me pull this up. So Asia is huge. Let me get my Zoom. Let me share. There we go. All right. So when we speak of Asia, we're talking about 5 regions, and we have East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Western Asia, and including all the Polynesian, Melanesian, all those islands in Oceania to the east that aren't even on this map. So this is a huge, huge area where we are talking about a whole variety of nations, cultures, religions, ethnicities, and today, this month of May, actually it was chosen to be AAPI Heritage Month for a couple reasons, but also to celebrate all the immigrants we have in the United States of Asian descent. So 2 reasons that May was chosen was this is the first Japanese who came to the United States, came on May 7th in 1843. And May was also chosen to mark the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th in 1869. And as many of you know, the majority of the workers who laid the tracks were Chinese immigrants. So then in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed and prohibited any persons of Asian descent from immigrating to the United States. And any Asian who was already in the United States was prevented from becoming an American citizen. There's a great fear that the Chinese were taking jobs away from other European Americans. Sounds familiar. The act was intended initially to last only for 10 years, but it was strengthened in 1892 and made permanent in 1902. And then in 1941, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, all Japanese Americans, including US citizens who had been here since the 1800s, were forcibly interned in concentration camps. So in 1943, the laws began to change. Immigrants from China, the Philippines, and South Asia were slowly being allowed in limited numbers. It was not until the Immigration Act of 1965 when all quotas limiting the number of any Asians from a particular country that was repealed. So that's just a brief little history explains why we have Asians here who've been here for 5, 7 generations, and then the slew of recent immigrants. A lot of those recent immigrants, they were only allowed in based on their professional status and their perceived ability to contribute to Americans' economy and culture. So now I'd like to show you, before I introduce our guest, I would like to show you a video. I'll play you this video.
Thank you. Catherine, you're muted.
Thank you. So what you just heard was a video of our guest, critically acclaimed soprano, visual artist, and TED Fellow, Tharanga Goonetilleke, who is a native of Sri Lanka. She graduated with her artist diploma for opera studies, as well as her Master of Music degree in voice and opera from the Juilliard School. Tharanga is the first and only woman yet from Sri Lanka to be accepted to the prestigious Juilliard School, and the only native South Asian yet to be accepted to Juilliard for voice. She has a Bachelor of Music degree from Converse College, Spartanburg, South Carolina, with a minor in biology. She is also an associate of the Trinity College of Music, London, England. Tharanga has over a dozen leading operatic roles under her belt, including Mimi from La Bohème Puccini and Pamina from Die Zauberflöte, The Magic Flute by Mozart. Tharanga made her New York City opera debut in 2010. Her operatic and concert career has taken her all over the world, including Italy, France, England, Scotland, Korea, Uganda, India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Canada, and the United States. As a visual artist, Tharanga is most sought after for her line drawings, illustrations, and impressionistic paintings. Her most recent work as an illustrator is the picture book, The Jungle Book, for the Glimmer Glass Festival, which is currently underway to be released in the fall of 2021. Tharanga also donated paintings for the VAC Spring Gala in 2020 and 2021. Since being selected a TED Fellow in 2015, Tharanga enjoys traveling the world, sharing her story as an inspirational speaker, performer, and an absolutely gifted educator. Tharanga currently resides in Shore Hills, New Jersey with her husband and 2 young children. So I'd like you all to welcome Ms. Goonetilleke.
Hi.
Hi, Tharanga.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I guess first we could begin if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood and life growing up in Sri Lanka.
Well, so 2 things. So in Sri Lanka, it's a culture that is very family oriented. And then specifically in my lifetime, my childhood until I moved to the United States, the social aspect of things were different from what it is now, and it is different from what it used to be before I was born because of the Civil War that happened my entire childhood. So there's 2 things I always see: the war and my home. So it's there are 2 things, but they're still big influences in my life. So as a child growing up, I grew up in a very sheltered sort of home. It's my parents, my sister, and myself. And for them, education was everything. And they made sure that we went to the best schools and everything, not because they were pretty well off or anything. We were kind of a middle-class family, but education was everything. And with that comes certain amounts of pressure, to do well in school and things like that. But at the same time, my home was full of music and art. And I think it's also because my parents, whether they acknowledge it or not, are artists themselves, but they had other professions because there's not a whole lot of scope in Sri Lanka, at least when I was growing up, to be an artist and still be able to make a living and things like that. So they were artists, but they were not, at the same time. So the war makes you sort of, well, first of all, I didn't know anything different. So I didn't know what it is to live without a war at the time. So that makes one feel as if that is the world. So it is not always pretty, but like within the group, or the family that you live in, or your friends and your school, you have so much joy, interestingly. And then there's this other thing that you're always trying to be careful of, this war, because there's going to be like random bomb blasts. Like it's so normal for us, and that should never be normal for a child, and I grew up in a much more,
oh my God.
I know.
I'm so blown right now. Thank you very much. Oh my God, thank you. You're welcome.
And everyone, please make sure their mics are muted.
Thank you.
Should I keep going? All
Yeah,
right. So,
sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. But I have to say now that this whole conversation with the dichotomy of, having a really, it was a joyful childhood, believe it or not. But at the same time, there's this shadow of the war. Like, for example, in the mornings when there have been times, not every year of my life, but there have been like when the war was at its, worst and stuff. In the mornings when you say goodbye to your parents, you don't really know what's going to happen at the end of the day. Are they going to come back home? Or so you hug them, you say goodbye. So that feeling, I still have it. It's something that you don't really lose because you don't take that moment for granted. Like my kids right now, they would just say bye. I mean, sometimes they forget to say bye. Like it's very different. So, and then you hear as a child like the death toll of the day and things like that on TV. That was normal. I mean, right now through COVID, I think kids have got exposed to things like that a little bit, but that was very much part of our day when we were growing up. So, but because of my particular case of my home being so much immersed in the arts, like we always had music in our home. My mom was always painting, we were making things. I think that sort of was quite therapeutic. And sort of an escape it wasn't done purposely for that reason, but I really feel looking back, the reason we had so much of joy was that, because that allows you to find yourself within all the mess. So yeah, that's how I grew up. And then of course I was never intending to become an artist or a singer, but I wanted to become, well, we only have a few choices, like you become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or something else if you can't become one of those three things, because those are the three things that will hopefully guarantee some sort of a good lifestyle eventually.
That sounds very Asian right there.
Yeah, that's very Asian, exactly. So it's like a common story,
Yes.
So my path was towards the end of like high school, you had to choose like your field, and I had chosen to do chemistry, physics, and biology because I wanted to be something something along the lines of becoming maybe a medical doctor, but at least in that field of things. So that was my goal. But I always was very curious and very self-taught in terms of like reading like things out of encyclopedias on art or music, that I couldn't help myself. That just was my nature, so that's how things went down as a kid.
So then how did you end up, especially with, like you said, the knowing that, there's a field you should go in to, on your parents' sanctum and for financial security, and that they were artists themselves, but didn't do it as a full-time job. How did you end up studying music?
Yeah, so I heard opera or the type of type of singing for the first time when I was about 12 on a CD. It didn't even belong to me because I didn't have a CD player, but I heard it at a friend's place. And then somehow that sound and me, like there was a connection, and I would try, and I actually got my dad to convert that CD into a cassette tape, because I could play that in my house. So, and then I would sing along with it. And I could sound like that person on the CD. And I mean, of course, nothing close to that actual person was Kirita Kanawa. She's like amazing. But so I thought I could, I was like imagining myself singing. Like I would be doing this all the time. And my mom and dad thought it was kind of funny, and kids on the road would be like, making all kinds of weird noises, hearing these crazy little kids, they try to sing like an opera singer. But that's how I was, But anyway, so my voice kept learning things without like really knowing that I was learning that, because you have to have a certain sense of like, language and ear for languages when you want to pursue opera, right? So just listening to this stuff, like I didn't even know if it was French or Italian. I didn't know the difference, but I could hear. I trained myself by just listening to that particular tape at first, and then I obviously was looking for more, and but there was no YouTube at the time, right? This is like in the late 90s. So I didn't have, I mean, none of us had that kind of resource at the time, right? But then anyway, I decided to participate in a competition that was for Western music. And it was done by the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka. And I had a very supportive teacher at school who was our choir director. And she also encouraged me to participate in it because she was like very fond of like me. And then she would encourage me to sing at school and things like that. But anyway, so I took part in this competition, and it was called the Symphony Orchestra Concerto competition. And I was about 15. And that year I won for voice category. So if you win the competition, you get to perform with the orchestra as part of the award. So since then, they had invited me to sing in several occasions because there aren't that many, classical opera singers in Sri Lanka. So it wasn't like, they chose me out of a whole bunch, but like, so I got the opportunity. And then in one of the concerts, which was actually the Millennium Concert in year 2000, one of the performers was a guest artist who was from the United States, and he was touring Asia at the time, and he was like gracious enough to stop by in Sri Lanka, play the Rhapsody in Blue with the orchestra. And then he was doing like only a certain segment, so I sang the rest of it. And so he met me like pretty much at rehearsal, and he asked me what my plans were. And then I told him, like, I was, hoping to get into medical school or, something in biology. And I was, doing my final exam. That I was in high school, So, and then he was a bit surprised that I wasn't, like, I didn't mention music in my, my plans. And then he said, no, don't you want to do music? Don't you want to, maybe if you don't have options here to study it, wouldn't you want to maybe go overseas? And I said, well, not really. That was really not part of what I had ever thought about. So, and then he said, no, but you must think about it. You must think about it. And then I said, well, first of all, you need a lot of money for it, because like the rupee versus the dollar or pound, it's a whole nother thing, right? So it was really not part of the agenda. So, but then he was very persistent. His wife was with him. His name is Dr. Douglas Weeks. So he kind of pursued it with my school. Like he kind of kept not wanting this to go away. And then, of course, we were not budging because I had like so many plans. It's very competitive in Sri Lanka to do like the final exams and get into a med school and things like that. So my parents didn't want the additional distraction of, me considering other things at that moment. So, but still, that man did not give up, and he realized that we were not going to be applying to any schools. And then one day, there was this packet from Converse College, Spartanburg, South Carolina, in my mail with an acceptance letter and a full scholarship to come study there and to see that he's actually a professor in that university, because he could do that because he worked there. And like we were all kind of like, okay, what do we do now kind of situation. And then my dad and I finished my exams. I completed high school and we were waiting on the results and things. And then we decided to go and check this place out. So that was the first step. So my dad and I came to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And then they allowed me to register if I wanted to as a music student, and as well as a biology student, because I didn't know what I wanted at that moment, So that was the beginning. That's how I moved to the US.
My goodness, he's like, there, like maybe money will do it, because you're like, doctor, like, I mean, and for those who don't know, these exams, it's based on how well you do. Where I imagine this is Kate Strong, and tell me if I'm wrong. How well you do, the better you do, the better like education opportunity you get. Like,
yeah, because there aren't not that. I mean, Sri Lanka is a small country, and there's only so many universities. So, and then those universities are like free of charge. You don't have to pay for them, but only like a few get in. So it's very competitive. So a lot of people don't get the opportunity to do higher education because of that. Well, not because they're not smart enough. It's just that there aren't too many options unless you decide
limited
to go
options.
abroad, you know, if you can go overseas, but then that only is a luxury for a few people. So yeah.
So then when you came here, guess that you thought this is something you want to do. You know, I one thing is I'm curious, how was it like, you know, the idea of, because you weren't growing up thinking you were going to live in another country. So how was it like, you know, part of your decision making? And when you moved to South Carolina, of all places, the United States, so South Carolina, what was that like for you? And also, you know, in your relationship with your parents, maybe even, given that they are definitely artists, but not pursuing that as a career.
Well, I mean, they were kind of cautiously optimistic because I mean, they loved the fact that I got this opportunity, but at the same time, like what happens after, you know, what like with a music degree, what can you do when you come back? You know, that kind of question. Right? But then I think that was the very first time my parents really asked me what I wanted to do. And without a whole lot of thought, really, my first instinct was for me to pursue this. Like it was not like, I don't think I've ever had a chance to answer to that question in my whole life up until then, right? Nobody asked me what I wanted to be. It was like, this is what you should be, pick, you know, because I mean, it's not that they were wrong to do that, because if not, I would probably have a very difficult life, you know, or, you know, it'll be difficult basically. So, but here, the world opened, right? And also you have like the idea of when we landed in the United States, in South Carolina, regardless of whichever state it would have been, I felt like, you know, there are no security checkpoints, there are no people with guns, because that's what I know. Right? So it was another place where I felt like, not that I ever felt like I was not free, but there was a feeling of freedom. And with that freedom, I think I just sort of felt a sense of relief. And I know people call the US the land of opportunity or whatever it is, but then that was not what I was seeking. You know, I didn't come there for the opportunity. I came there because something just came to me, you know, and then I just followed it. Like I wasn't searching or looking for a way out. I was not. So it sort of happened to me without any control, really. But then I do remember that feeling of like, oh, nobody's checking my ID. I'm not talking about the airport. I'm talking about like, you know, when in Sri Lanka, when we were passing through the barricades and stuff, people would check your ID. I mean, that was just normal. Like, it's like, we're not afraid of these big soldiers and they're doing their jobs, you know, but that was absent. There was none of that, right? So that was like a good feeling, really. And then when the question was asked from my dad to me, like, do you want to stay? Do you want to see how this goes? And then I said, I didn't think, I said yes. I just said yes. And then he was, I think, also surprised by the answer. And then he told me, you know, I can come home anytime. Any day you decide you want to come back, you come back. You know, there's no, like, you don't have to stay. There's no obligation. So I did stay. It was painful, the idea of leaving my parents, my sister, all my friends, everything I know, because I really didn't know anything but that, right? But the fact that I had that option, I can always go back any day, that was
Right.
nice. I'm glad my dad told me.
Yeah, there was a choice for you to come, and you had the ability to leave.
Yes.
If it didn't work out, sure.
Yeah, and it felt better than my being told that these are your three choices, pick. You know, that was not a choice. That was what was available to me, that I couldn't afford anything but that. But this was different. Like suddenly my choices were larger, like bigger or many. And, you know, I knew that I loved this subject. I just didn't know enough I never gave myself the opportunity to like really think about it. So my undergrad was that place where for 4 years, I finished all 4 years, where I was able to really find myself, I feel, without any external, you know, barriers, I would say. that not imposed by my family as such, not even from my culture. It's more than that, like when you're living in a situation like that. So, but I really never intended to leave Sri Lanka, and I still wish I had this same situation over there because I miss it, you know. But this is how it led me to like find myself in a way. So my life just sort of took a different twist in an interesting way.
It's so fascinating because it's, both culture and family, and but also this was an opportunity, right? Like it's such an opportunity, almost like opening like a world you don't even know exists till you get there, and then anything can happen. But having that choice to stay or go home. Yeah. So for you in that adjustment, once you stayed, you kept staying. So I imagine you made it work. What did you find most difficult in missing? Like what was like probably the most difficult thing you had to adjust to coming to the United States?
Well, I suddenly realized that I only knew a very tiny bit about the world. Like I didn't know that until I stepped out of it, like I didn't realize that the other people were not like me, in the world. I mean, that, but you don't really know that until you step out of where you live or what you're comfortable with, right? I mean, not just by the way I look. Like, I mean, first of all, I was the only person there that kind of looked like me, except I think there were like two other girls who are from South Asian background in other departments that I would see them once in a while. But like, it was like we were odd, right? Like, but no one really made us feel odd, which was nice. I don't know whether it's just because it's a college town and all of that kind of thing. But then it was sort of an opportunity for me to speak about where I'm from. And like, I've almost felt like I was the ambassador for my country. Which was nice. But then over time, I also realized that I shouldn't take on that responsibility because my understanding and my interpretation of my country is not really accurate. One person cannot represent that, right? And it will be not okay by all the different ethnicities and really, like, people of different religions that live in Sri Lanka. It wouldn't be fair for them, for me to say that this is, because a lot of times I'm the only Sri Lankan that they've met. So it's wrong to say that,
Right.
or act as if I am the person. And also, like, it was interesting that people, when they first would meet me, they didn't know that Sri Lanka was a country. And so they would get confused whether my name is Tharanga or Sri Lanka. So it was this weird, I thought it was kind of funny, but very soon I also realized that like it makes you feel kind of small, and like to a lot of people, your people don't exist. You know what I mean? So it was coming from a place of, unfortunately, a place of ignorance from their part. And then the question was, is it my job to educate them? That's a pretty big responsibility. But I mean, I kept at it. And so those were struggles, in that, like, you have to always, like, instead of having a regular conversation with a professor or a colleague, you're basically talking about where you're from. And that is not where you want relationships to build, right? Because that sort of separates you from everyone else. So I just wish I could just talk to a person, like saying, hello, I'm so-and-so, who are you? And then we just like have conversations about a nice book or a piece of music.
Yeah, so from what I hear, it's like you may want to speak about the art or the subject matter, and they're almost preoccupied on your looks and your color, and like they're like, oh, where are you from?
Like, how did you get into opera? I mean, those are very, very, very genuine questions. But if I didn't look the way I do, that question wouldn't be one of the first things that they would be curious about, right? They'll be like, oh, that's interesting, or like, it'll be a different tone, a different, like, it won't be so, I don't know, you know what I mean? It wouldn't be
it's like you become it's not tokenized. What's the word? It's like it's the feature that sticks out to them is, oh, you're Sri Lankan, not that you're amazing opera singer, an artist. Like it's because you're like Sri Lankan artist. Like like you don't know which part is the focus of that's most important to them sometimes.
Right.
So when you came to New York City, in your experience at Juilliard, how was that compared to South Carolina in Spartanburg?
It was different in that, of course, I mean, it being New York, it's a much bigger, melting pot and so on. But again, there weren't that many Sri Lankans. I mean, there were no Sri Lankans in the university. I mean, actually, there weren't any South Asians. I think there was one drama student at one point when I was there for 5 years, did my master's and then did my postmaster's, like an artist diploma. So like a long period of time. So I didn't really see South Asians there. But irrespective of that, I mean, I didn't see too many people of color, really. I mean, there were. I mean, I'm comparatively not as many as one would like, but it wasn't difficult. But at the same time, I found myself I'm not specifically talking about my being in the university, but I'm at Juilliard, but I'm just talking about like just living in New York in general. People just assume that like all people that look like me are Indian, and I'm not. And there's a huge difference between Indians and Sri Lankans. I mean, I know that now more than ever because I'm married to an Indian. So, but then that doesn't seem to go away. Like I constantly have to sort of disappoint people sometimes because people, I mean, would ask me about India, as if they already know that I'm from India, but I'm not. So it's always an awkward moment, like how do you miss India? People would ask me questions like that without any reference to anything else. You know what I mean? So
Out of the blue. Do you miss India?
Like, yeah, do you miss India? Do you go back often? I'm like,
yeah. For me, it'd be like at the bar when I was single, they'd be like, so where are you from? I'm like, Hoboken. Where are you really from? It's born in Maryland. Oh, or no, I grew up in Ohio, but no, where are you born? It's born in Maryland. Oh. And then even I stop, I'd be like, no, I mean, like, where did your people come from? So it's an interesting, but that happens in New York, where when I grew up in Ohio and there were many fewer East Asians, it was like your experience in South Carolina, or because there's so few, or depending where I was in Ohio, I was in the middle of nowhere. Like there was a respect because they knew they didn't know. Versus when I came to like Philadelphia and the metropolitan areas, there's more people feel like, oh, well, I've known enough people who look like you that I can say something that might be more on target. And then they will stereotype a little more.
Right. I mean, the thing is, I'm not really sure if the people who do, make us feel a certain way, I don't really think they intend to do it at all. It just sort of like comes up as if it's a place of like an entitlement, that has been just handed over as something that's just normal. And hopefully, I mean, I think people are a lot more aware now and are more cautious about how they view internationals or immigrants or whatever it is. But that's what's been happening. And I think the fact that more and more people have been more vocal about how they actually, because a lot of like South Asians for sure are not very vocal about those things. They just sort of mind their own business. They stay in their little groups. And I certainly have not been that. And I of course, I'm friends with a lot of South Asians, but I have equal amounts of friends of all different ethnicities, So, and I do that on purpose in a way that, because those people who do stick to their own people is also doing that on purpose because it's more comfortable to do that. But I feel like I'm not fully myself when I'm only with South Asians, because right now I've pretty much lived half of my life in the US, so I'm not entirely, that one thing that I used to be when I was much younger, right? So, but the thing that I can't get over is that when you were explaining earlier about what Asia is, even if people knew that huge area is Asia, I find it very interesting that people don't view people like me as Asians.
Are
You
they
know,
only few people like me?
yes. And
Right.
I don't understand it. And people
Yeah.
talk to me about Asians as if they're not me,
You.
you
Yeah.
know, but that's not okay. And so I have talked about it a lot, but it's tiring. You know, it's not that people aren't aware that Asia is this, but then there's this other idea of like how people have been categorized without those people's permission or knowledge.
Right, right. And I agree with you. No one does it on purpose, but it revealed that behind us is a system, an organization in the United States of how people are grouped, right? Like, why don't they do it by hair color or hair length or whether you how many ear piercings you have? It could be some physical attribute when, you know, or something, right? Or why is it only a physical attribute? It could be something else, right? But in this country, you know, because of all the history of race and culture and like who came and this is a conversation for my talk next Tuesday on race and culture. How you know conversation like you know in the U.S. we talk more about race and socioeconomic status, for instance. You know, like even more so than religion sometimes, but like how we are categorized. I think you know you brought up the how being married to Indian, you see like you didn't know how many differences until you're like really intimate and one-on-one, and you're like, oh, look at all these little differences. But the further out you go, if people aren't interested, they'll just paint a broad paintbrush, like a broad swath, and say, oh, it's Asia, so you must be all that. You know, and United States has a like when I lived in New Orleans, you know, in the early 80s, like I was dirty. I was always dirty and sexualized as a 5-year-old girl. That's how the other kids would tease me. Is like, you know, they're basically, I didn't even know they're basically calling me like, oh, you're gonna go be a prostitute. Like this is what 8-year-old, like 5 and 6-year-olds are saying to me. Like, oh, you're just dirty from your knees on the ground. Like, you know, like, yeah, like it was very, and that was just sort of, that's how they spoke to me. You know, and then it's interesting how that perception, this is like anti-hate, this hatred for Chinese, I think is more virulent until Pearl Harbor when the Japanese got it, and that's what led to the lifting of the Exclusion Act, which led to the lifting of all the others because they you know, Japan was using it as propaganda against US in the war, saying, oh, you're so liberating, you say you're all for freedom, then why do you exclude all these groups of people from coming into your country? So I find it that race, and we have had this conversation, when it's not important to us, people will apply it to us. When we're not thinking, like, I don't go around thinking myself as like a Taiwanese American female of, you know, who grew up here of a certain class. Like, I'm just me doing my thing, wanting my donut and my coffee, right? But like someone will come and they'll say, oh, so where are you from? And I'll be like, wait, I wasn't, what do you mean? I just came from the donut shop. Like,
Right.
so for you as a working artist, because for you, that's so important, your expression and as you talk about growing up, for you, that was a great way of like, you know, your family used as a coping mechanism to bring joy in your household. And I think a lot of joy, that is what joy is, right? When you're in the depths of despair, you find the beauty, you find the truth, and you are able to continue. Like really joy comes from such despair. So for you, you know, now, how do you find your authentic identity and self? You know,
Well, yeah.
working in America.
I mean, identity is like such a huge topic, right? I mean, there's the identity that you're given, and then there's the identity that you build from within. And a lot of times, I think the two can have a bit of a conflict, a lot of times, right? But then eventually from my experience, I mean, I'm still learning about it for my life, but from the experiences that I've gathered so far, I feel at the end of the day, what really matters is the one that comes from within, because the other part you can't control, right? So when it comes to identity, I mean, of course, I'm Sri Lankan. I mean, all that is like, you know, conditions into which I was born in, and I'm proud of it. You know, I'm proud of my culture. I'm proud of my food, my attires that I get from my home country and things like that. But then the fundamental factors of being human. I think every one of us have to question that, and that's where you have to build your identity about, like, what does it mean for you to be a decent person? How would you like to be treated? I mean, because a lot of times we tend to sort of treat others almost based on how they treat us, because that's the instinct that you get, especially if someone treats you badly. Either you avoid them, or you try to sort of put up a fence in front of you so that you won't get hurt again, and things like that. So you have to make choices like, am I the kind of person who's going to keep building the fences and walls in front of me, or am I the kind of person who's going to open and invite them in? So you have to make those kinds of choices, which are going to build your identity for you, for your within. So the identity is so personal. And I think that building of that is eventually what's going to take you through the difficult times. And like, for example, I'll just tell you one instance that happened. This was on stage, right? And I always forget that I'm brown or whatever it is. I forget. I mean, until someone reminds me that I am. So we were all like, on stage rehearsing, and I was playing this particular role. I'm not going to name the show. I think it'll be too many people will be exposed. But I was playing a character that was sort of like a princess queen kind of character, and it was the lead soprano part. And so therefore you get all this like, fancy outfit and everything. So you had to walk on this, in this particular production, I was supposed to walk on this platform. And the scene is such that this princess is walking on this like higher ground. And then there's all these, the chorus people who are the peasants. They're basically on the stage level, not on the platform. So they can reach their hands really high, like to kind of almost to touch your dress or something. That's the scene, right? And so the director was unhappy with like how much the chorus was invested in this quest for like, showing very exaggerated motions on for that particular scene. And then the director kept giving them instructions on how to use their fingers, like how to show greed, how to show hunger, how to show, and all of those things. And all I had to do was just walk very royally down this thing, right? And I think I may have had something to sing while I'm doing that, I forget. But and then suddenly the director was so frustrated with the chorus, because obviously what he wanted was still not coming through. And the director goes, "Can you guys please act third world?" And then everybody just paused. And then to make matters worse, the director goes, "If you don't know what that means, ask Tharanga."
Oh,
Okay, it was like the weirdest thing, and then suddenly I remember that I come from a third world country where people are hungry and greedy. I'm like, is that what it is?
And wait, is he like not like you're not presenting in his mind what royalty is because you're brown?
No, see,
not,
that
like, it
wasn't at what I was doing, right? It was for those other people, but somehow that was the idea of such people that he or she had for this group. I mean, it wasn't that the director wished that I was down there doing that. It wasn't that at all, because I'm sure that director wanted me to be doing this part because it was appropriate for my voice type or whatever. But the fact that that's the view,
third world.
And it was kind of really awkward for everyone on stage after that. So we had to take a break and everything. But I mean, so at that moment, I have to decide. I mean, it's insulting, right? Because that's not where I come from. That's not even how the third world is, really, if you really think about it.
Correct.
And so, like, what are you supposed to do at that moment? Like, it defines you. Not only from the outside, it also defines you from your inside. Like, because you have to tell yourself, is that you or is that not you? And then also you have to decide, am I pissed off right now? Am I angry? Am I insulted? Is my ego hurt? though all those questions have to be answered like so quickly within a moment, because it affects your performance.
Absolutely.
It affects
And
your
you
life.
can't sing, and if you're tense, you can't get good resonance in your voice.
So, I mean, things like those happen either on stage, off stage. So, and then you realize that these questions pop in your mind. And I think how you answer those questions should not be done in a haste. And because it really matters, because it builds on you. So I personally have decided to, I mean, you can't stop your emotion. Like, you may feel angry, you may feel disappointed, even you might feel bitter, all those things come, but you don't have to choose to be an angry person. You don't have to choose to be a bitter person, because that is a choice. The immediate feeling you accept, and then you keep it and hold on to it. I mean, I decide always to let it go, because I can imagine that the accumulation of all of that and holding on to them could be a really big game changer, right? It can change you to something that you don't want to be. I don't want to be a bitter person.
Right.
So that's a choice you make. So it's a constant question and a constant need to answer that for yourself. And I think those things build your identity for you, because you really can't do much about what other people think of you. But then maybe one way to control what others sort of impose on you is also to be okay with facing it and still not trying to prove them wrong, but just by the way you live and accept everyone as they're just as they are, regardless of what they bring to the table, sometimes is big enough for them to see that they were wrong. It takes a little bit of like, a pause and a step back to get there. And I have done that many times, and it's helped me. And the longer you do it, the more comfortable you become with the process. It doesn't approve of certain behaviors. It does not. It's with full awareness. It's not with the denial of like, oh, I didn't hear that, or I hear it, but it just falls flat in front of me because I know who I am.
You have learned how to handle it. And what I hear is that you've become, even though you didn't ask for the external judgment and labeling on you, like, you have used this opportunity to really develop your own sense of self even further and reaffirm it. Would you say that's accurate? Like, your sense of self, authenticity is always being challenged unexpectedly in this way. So do you think that has that helped you then grow and really learning more of who you are?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of growing despite of these issues, I think, is important. And in that, a lot of times as adults, I feel like we somehow, once school's over, you start to work and things, people don't necessarily think about growing the same way they did when they were students, right? It's unfortunate. And I feel like that idea of like you're always a student, or the fact that you never grow enough to be done growing, that helps with dealing these matters as well. Because the moment you decide to sort of define yourself in a much more closed way, like, I'm going to shield myself and I'm going to do whatever it takes, and the approach of sort of like the harder approach, I think it stops one from growing. And if I refuse to let that happen, I have to be open and be willing to sort of be vulnerable at this, with a certain amount of like, there's a protection because of the fact that that your foundation and what you grow everything on top of is solid, and I think that comes from a long time of building it. You can't just overnight do it. And it comes
Right.
from having experienced things that are not so great and having sometimes made the wrong choice and felt what it is to live with some kind of like a grudge. Or, I mean, those things happen to us and we're human. Why did she have to say that to me? And then you might live with that for like a month and you hate yourself having lived that way. And then you like, I don't want to live with that. Let me find a way to get out of it. Because that cannot define me, because that is not me. It came from the outside. Right.
Love that. What I love so much is that you're so empowered, but it's not empowered by having to like fight against. Like it's really, it's actually becoming calmer, right? And like the strength is built by you. Neither like I think a lot of people when they think about, how do you counter racism, discrimination, you think of it as a very active, like aggressive, like on protesting, like very external and physically acting in that way. But it reminds me, and I always use this example, and of like when you're singing, when you're teaching, like when you have this, you have to tell me if I explain this right. So when you're singing, you have to have a really solid base, right? You have to be completely connected to the ground. But as you go high, you go through this place where you change registers between your chest and your head voice. And it's very narrow and it's different, unique for everyone. But to like get through it, you can't force your way through it. You have to be small and like just let it sit there, and like you always tell me, like the smaller and more you don't fight against it, the more beautiful and resonant, like physically it sounds louder it becomes. But you can't fight it. You have to let it be, let yourself travel the natural route. And then once you're through it and then you're in your high voice, then you're just like, it's like heaven, sky, resonance, freedom, voice is like, it could be going for like miles and miles. And I love that so much because it reminds me, like to me, it's like literally how we have to be in the universe, like connected. But when you're in that difficult place, it can be so beautiful, like in the place of challenge. But you can't fight it. You have to like go with it.
I think everyone's, again, so that is like sort of the definition for me, right? Like that's what I've found works. But I can imagine for some people to be more vocal about it, or even protesting for something that is their way of dealing with it. And I couldn't criticize anyone for that, because you need that too. You need to sometimes put your foot forward in a very different manner. But the foundation still, I think, is the same for everyone, where like, what is your purpose? Are you just doing it simply because you're angry, or they're really fighting for something that needs to be changed? Or the fighting isn't always bad. So sometimes I would think like the fact that, like one example again is one time I was away out of town performing for something or the other, and then we were hosted by different families, and then the family that I lived with was just completely fine. I mean, they were regular American folk, and then the neighbor was also similar, and the neighbor didn't quite, I think she knew that this family was hosting some artists, but she didn't know who or what. So she saw me over the fence, and she clearly assumed that I'm not one of the artists and thought that I was coming there as help. Okay. And then she asked me, when you're done there, would you have some time? She said, excuse me, can you help me? There's something in the attic that I need to be brought down, and I might need a little bit of your time. And would you have time today? Like she asked me, like as if like she knew what I do.
Yeah.
Right. And then I said, well, I have rehearsal from this time to this time, but right after that, I have like an hour. I will help you. But I could have said, what do you think I am?
Yeah.
And like be kind of defensive. I mean, so my way is the other way. I mean, it's not done in a way of like, I don't calculate these things, that's just the way I approach it. And then she looked at me, and then she realized right away when I said rehearsal, oh my gosh, she's one of the artists. She's not like a cleaning lady or whatever it is. And then she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I said, please don't worry. And she's this old lady, like I still feel bad for her because I kind of felt like she got embarrassed by her own doing, but at the same time, maybe she never had any experience with somebody else like us, like, so, and I said, but I am going to come and help you today. And I did. And but she didn't let me really do the what she really wanted, but then it was all good. But then anyway, so we all deal with this a different way, and through that people are better off eventually. That's what we want, right? Like at the end of the episode or many episodes, you want the world to be slightly better. So so that's like, I hold on to that sort of like, I don't want to have this sort of like tooth for tooth kind of feeling in my within me, because it doesn't work for me, and but of course, if someone were to question me about is this okay or not, I wouldn't hesitate to, like, I wouldn't go beating around the bush. I would be blunt about how I feel about certain ways of treating BIPOC people or whatever it is. I would stand up, I would speak for it. But personally, when I deal with it in individual situations, I've usually taken relatively the gracious way, I would say, because then it sort of reciprocates better in my experience.
And I think for you're able to do this because you've thought a lot about it. And when people think a lot about their race and identity, then you really can take that gray area. It's not like it's either one way or the other, or like you can approach someone who says that to you and explain to them, like, whether you have to or not, you can just do it. It doesn't affect you because you know who you are. And I think that shows even more so, like, all that work you have done living in the United States for these years, like you've been able to handle when people, like you said, when parents of other children, they're like, well, I don't want my child to learn like traditional music. I only want them to learn classical music. And so you're, in your mind, you're like, well, what do you think I teach? Like, just odd ways that they pop up here and there, you're able to separate yourself from that. So I thank you for sharing all of this.
Oh,
I was wondering if the audience have any questions. I definitely have seen a bunch of comments here. One person commented, and it's stereotyping people for what they look like rather than who they are, as if we can only be interested in the art and music of the culture we originate from. And this person said, which I hope is not true, because I would be horrible at river dancing, says this person. And I love how you can say we can rise above prejudice and be a better person. Vincent, you have something you wish to ask?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. What does your sister do for a living? And did your parents ever compare the two of you, with a different direction that she might have gone in?
Well, interestingly, she's also a musician, and
Wow.
we have very similar lives well, that's hard to say. She's also actually currently a music teacher for a school. The thing is, I think our whole family is very artistically inclined. So when the opportunity came from like one of us to sort of find it, it was easier for the others to follow what they feel is okay as well. So did our parents compare us? It's hard to say, only because we are quite different. The two of us are very different, although like a lot by appearance we kind of look very similar, but we are actually quite very different people. So our parents treated us like accordingly, so I didn't really feel the comparison.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, would you feel like your parents were typical for other Sri Lankan parents? Because my parents like to say they're not typical as other Taiwanese parents. They like to say that, and I'm just...
Well, I think they were typical. If you ask them, they might say they were not, but they are more typical than not, because they sort of, we were girls, the girls had to be raised a certain way. We had all of that, that's very much the umbrella of like at least South Asian parents. And, we were always chaperoned. things like that, that's very culturally so, and then they went by all of that. But I know that when they allowed me to leave, they had to go against what everybody else probably was expecting from them to do. So in that sense, they were exceptional, because I never thought they would let me go. Because I mean, even when the opportunity came and it was like a sort of a too good to be true situation for me, it wasn't really too good to be true to them. It was more like, oh, we had to send our daughter away. Like she's never stayed overnight at somebody else's house, like one night without us. It's a whole different thing. What would other people think?
We got
It's
into medical
very different.
school.
Yeah,
Like-
and then she's abandoning it all. Like, how are we going to explain to? I mean, I'm sure all of that was something that they dealt with. So in that sense, they somehow managed to, I don't know, like sort of get themselves removed from their reality to allow me my choice. So in that way, they are exceptional, I think.
The support. I mean, you seem incredibly supportive
Which,
versus saying,
I'm sure they had a lot of doubts, it might not be the best decision, but they also could see the kind of kid I was, right? So they probably felt like they would really hold me back.
they knew they couldn't dissuade you.
I mean, if they told me not to go, I don't think I would have put up a fight. I don't think so, because I mean, I never did that as a kid. So, because that's just what you do. You believe that your parents have the best interest at heart and they know better than you. That's just the way we were raised.
Right.
So
That is exceptional, because I can imagine maybe some pushback. They're like, well, we let you go to college for that, but you can't pursue a career as a musician. Right? I can see that. I did want to play one more thing. I wonder if anyone, this is the last chance for questions. We do have requests to see about your webpage. I will share. Tharanga does have a webpage. You can look her up on her webpage. You can see her art. And we didn't even speak about your art today.
I know.
Tharanga has all this amazing art. I encourage you. You know what? This is what I'm going to do. I am going to share a video that has both her singing along with a series of 50 line art drawings that you completed during COVID. Can I share this?
Sure.
I know the recording isn't the best that you wish.
That's okay. I mean, but like, I do want to just say very quickly, in my visual art, like both in the line drawings and the canvas paintings, which you may not see now, but I don't ever, color the people. I don't, because I want everybody to be able to relate. I mean, it wasn't consciously done that way. I didn't plan it, but it's always stayed that way. When I do use a lot of color, I use it everywhere else except within the person, so that one could just sort of like put themselves into that shell of a being. So that is something that I've always done. And there you go. So you can see, you don't really know who the person or where it's from, but there's all kinds of metaphors and hidden things in them. That there's always a human in my painting somehow, that I hope, despite of religion, race, whatever, people could relate.
What I find most amazing about your line drawings is that you plan everything out. So this is one of my favorites, as you know. I love this one. It's so planned that when you sit down and draw, you do it in one sitting. I mean, you do it without, right? Like you don't.
I do. For the line drawings, I have everything in my mind before I put it on. But for the paintings, not always the case, because I experiment with color a lot. Because I had to draw it freehand, so I can't erase. So for the line drawing, so that's why I need to kind of really know what I want.
And I think that's just clearly, I think your success is because you have such a clear vision, who you are and what you want, and you able to put it in action, and it's amazing. So we're so honored to have you today. I do want to share a little bit of this in our last couple of minutes. Just please know that this was done during COVID. So the singing and the piano recording were done separately. So they don't have the synchronicity you would usually have when a performer is performing with their accompanist. But these are drawings that Tharanga created during COVID, and that she gifted her friends who are all performance artists. Can you see it?